To my real legacy, my dad said, smiling at my sister. She gave me two perfect grandchildren. My 10-year-old son looked down and whispered, "What about me?" I kissed the top of his head, raised my glass and said this. The room went silent. My dad almost choked on his drink. My sister's smile vanished. When my dad raised his glass and said, "To my real legacy," I already had that twisting feeling in my chest. The kind you get when you know something's about to hurt, but it hasn't hit yet. He turned to my sister Claire, all proud smiles. She gave me two perfect grandchildren, he said, like he was announcing something historic. Everyone around the table chuckled politely. Claire beamed. Her husband gave her a nudge like she just won something. I didn't laugh. I didn't even move. I was sitting 2 seats down next to my son Jamie. He was 10, small for his age, quiet by nature and smarter than most adults I knew. He looked down at his plate. I could see him holding his breath, pretending to focus on a piece of overcooked broccoli. Then, in the tiniest voice like he was talking to himself, he asked, "What about me?" I kissed the top of his head, stood up and raised my glass. No hesitation. I said, "To Jamie. The one who never had to be perfect to be loved. The one who never needed approval to be kind. The one who taught me what real strength looks like even when it gets ignored." I didn't look at anyone else. Just him. The only legacy I'll ever care about. Silence. I mean dead, church-level silence. My dad blinked like someone had slapped him. He set his drink down, cleared his throat and started to speak, but nothing came out. Claire froze with her wine halfway to her lips. The corners of her smile collapsed like a building in slow motion. My cousin tried to mumble something about dessert. No one responded. After that, we left early. Jamie didn't ask me any questions until we were in the car. "Does Grandpa not like me?" he asked. I said something like, "He just doesn't show love very well, or he's old-fashioned, or it's not your fault," but none of it really meant anything. He already knew the truth. This wasn't the first time he'd been treated like furniture in that house. My dad never came to see him play soccer, never asked about his science projects, never even said, "I'm proud of you." I used to make excuses for it. I'd tell myself he was just awkward or forgetful or from a different generation. But it wasn't true. He loved Claire's kids. He memorized their school schedules, sent them new iPads every year, gave them the house keys when they were barely 16. He called them his reason for living. He barely remembered Jamie's birthday last year. I decided after that night that we were done. No more dinners. No more fake family moments. I wasn't going to drag my son into rooms where he wasn't seen. If that meant cutting my father out of our lives, so be it. I didn't even tell him why. I just stopped picking up the phone. 6 months passed. Quietly. Peacefully. And then one Tuesday morning I got a call from the hospital. My dad had been in a crash. Single car. Off the freeway. Head trauma, internal bleeding, possible spinal damage. They said he might not make it through the night. I sat there with the phone pressed to my cheek, frozen. I didn't even realize Jamie was watching me from the kitchen. When I told him, he looked confused. Not scared. Not sad. Just blank. Like he didn't know how to feel about a man who had never shown him love. I thought about not going. About staying home and letting the family handle it. Claire would be there, obviously. He always was. She'd step into the spotlight, do her daughterly duties, manage the drama and claim the role of the grieving child. But something in me shifted. I packed a bag. One for Jamie. One for me. I didn't tell anyone. I just drove to the hospital. That's when the cracks started to show. Not in my dad. Not yet. But in the story I thought I knew. Because when I walked into that ICU waiting room, Claire wasn't there. No one was. And that was just the beginning. When I walked into the ICU waiting room, I expected to see Claire pacing around, holding coffee, maybe crying into her hands for dramatic effect. But the room was empty except for a sleeping man in scrubs and a nurse typing at a computer. I asked for my dad. She looked up and said, "You must be Melody. You're the only family that's come so far." I thought I'd misheard. "No one else has been here?" She shook her head. "Just you." I asked if Claire had called. Maybe she was on her way. Maybe traffic. Maybe she had the kids. Maybe something. The nurse said nothing. Just gave me a tight smile and pointed down the hall. When I stepped into his room, I barely recognized him. Tubes. Wires. Machines beeping in strange rhythms. He looked small. Older than I remembered. His face was bruised, his right arm bandaged, his head shaved in patches where they'd operated. Jamie stood behind me quiet. I looked back at him and he nodded like he wanted to stay. So we did. All night. No one called. No one showed up. I didn't sleep, just sat there holding a paper cup of cold coffee, watching his chest rise and fall. In the morning I called Claire. No answer. I texted. Nothing. I figured she was dealing with the kids. I waited. By noon I found out she'd already spoken to a lawyer. Not just once but several times over the last 2 days. The nurse at the front desk let it slip. Your sister's been calling, asking for updates. Mostly about his condition and legal things. She wanted to know if he had a will on file at the hospital. Legal things. I laughed, but it didn't feel like laughing. Felt like breaking something inside my chest. For 3 days Jamie and I stayed. I brought him snacks from the vending machine, helped him with his homework at the little table in the corner of the room, even let him draw on my tablet. He drew Grandpa, sleeping with wires like vines all around him. I asked him why he added a heart floating above. He said because maybe now he loves me a little. Claire didn't show. Didn't call me. Nothing. But her lawyer did. He left a voicemail. Said there were some documents that needed clarification. Said it was best for the family to have things in order. Said Claire was working hard to protect everyone's interests and wanted to be sure there weren't any unexpected claims. Claims. Like I was a lawsuit waiting to happen. Like my son didn't exist. Like we weren't standing in that hospital room watching the man they all claimed to love fight for his life. I didn't tell Jamie what was happening. I just kept showing up. Reading to him when I could. Holding his hand when his blood pressure dropped. Sitting in silence when nothing could be said. Doctors came and went. Some hopeful. Some not. They said if he woke up there might be memory loss. Confusion. Impairments. On the 4th night something changed. Around 3 a.m. his eyes opened. Just for a second. But they opened. He looked around the room dazed. Confused. He saw me. Then Jamie. He blinked again. I could see the struggle in his face like his brain was rebooting. His hand twitched. And then he whispered something. Barely audible. Just one word. Melody? That was when I knew Claire's version of the story was about to collapse. When my dad said my name it barely made a sound. Just a dry whisper like his voice had to fight its way out. I stepped closer. Told him I was there. That everything was okay. He blinked slowly like he understood, then his eyes shifted to the side and landed on Jamie. There was a pause. A long one. He stared at him like he was seeing him for the first time. Like maybe, this time he really was. Jamie didn't say anything. He just nodded once like he was giving him permission to notice him. That was more grace than I could have mustered. I pressed the call button. The nurse came rushing in, then 2 more. Machines beeped, lights flashed, and within minutes the room was full of movement. They told us to step out while they checked his vitals. I didn't want to, but I didn't argue. Out in the hallway I finally checked my phone. Still nothing from Claire. But there was one new voicemail. A different number. Male voice. Said he was one of Dad's attorneys and needed to speak with all next of kin immediately. I didn't respond. Not yet. An hour later we were let back in. He was fully conscious now. Weak but awake. A doctor explained the surgery had gone better than expected. There might still be issues with memory but he was lucid. Responsive. The doctor added something offhandedly, almost as an afterthought. He's been asking who's been here. We told him you haven't left his side since the night he came in. He's surprised. I looked at Jamie. He looked at me. Neither of us said anything. Inside the room my dad was struggling to sit up. The nurse adjusted his bed and left us alone. I expected him to ask about Claire. His house. His car. Maybe the will, since that seemed to be the theme of the week. But the first thing he asked was, "Why are you here?" It wasn't cruel. It wasn't even bitter. It was confused. Genuinely confused. I told him it didn't matter. He was here. We were here. That was enough. He stared at me for a while like he was trying to piece something together in his head. Then he asked where Claire was. I told him the truth. She hadn't come. Not once. Not even a call. He didn't believe me. So I showed him the visitor log. The nurses had been documenting everyone who came and went. I flipped to the pages from the last 4 days and held them up. His name. Jamie's. Few staff. That was it. His eyes filled up but he didn't say anything. He just laid back and closed them again. He didn't speak much that day. But that night something shifted. He asked Jamie if he could draw something for him. Anything. Jamie chose to draw a tree with deep roots, and under it he wrote, "We're still here." I don't know what it did to my dad, but he didn't take his eyes off that paper for the rest of the night. The next morning Claire arrived. Not with flowers. Not with food. Not even with a proper greeting. He came with her lawyer. Claire walked into the room like she owned it. Perfect hair, pressed blazer, phone already in her hand. Her lawyer followed a step behind her, carrying a slim briefcase like this was a business meeting instead of an ICU room. She stopped short when she saw me. Then she saw Jamie. Her face did something strange. Not shock. Not guilt. Calculation. "Dad," she said, stepping closer to the bed. "Oh my God. I was so worried." He didn't respond right away. He just watched her. The same way he'd watched Jamie the night before. Like he was seeing something clearly for the first time. Her lawyer cleared his throat and introduced himself, then started talking about medical directives and power of attorney. He said it smoothly like this was routine. Like the man in the bed wasn't barely holding on to consciousness. That was when my dad lifted his hand. Weak, shaking but deliberate. "Sup," he said. The room went quiet again. Different kind of quiet this time. Heavy. He asked Claire where she'd been. She said she had the kids. She said hospitals were hard for them. She said she'd been calling constantly. She said she didn't want to overwhelm him. He asked how many times she'd come by. She didn't answer right away. Just glanced at her lawyer. That was enough. He told her the doctors had already told him everything. About the visitor log. About who sat with him when his blood pressure dropped. About who was there when he woke up confused and scared. About who held his hand while he couldn't move. He looked at Jamie. Then at me. "You were here," he said. Not a question. Claire laughed nervously. Said I was exaggerating. Said hospitals keep terrible records. Said she'd been busy making sure everything was handled properly. That was the wrong thing to say. My dad asked her what she meant by everything. Her lawyer tried to redirect. He mentioned estate planning. Protecting assets. Making sure intentions were respected. My dad's jaw tightened. He asked if she'd already started moving things around. Asked if she'd assumed he wasn't coming back. Claire said she was just being practical. He closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, he looked exhausted. Not physically. Something deeper. He told her to leave. She laughed again like it was a joke. Then she realized no one else was laughing. Not me. Not Jamie. Not the nurse who had stepped in and was standing quietly near the door. She tried one more time. Said she was his daughter. Said she deserved to be there. He told her she'd already made her choice. Security came. Not dramatically. Calmly. They escorted her lawyer first, then her. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just stared at me like I'd stolen something that belonged to her. After they were gone, my dad asked me to sit closer. He looked at Jamie and said he was sorry. Not sorry like people usually say it. Not quick. Not defensive. Just sorry. And for the first time in my life, I believed him. 2 days after Claire was kicked out of the hospital, I got a call from my dad's financial advisor. He said my father had requested an urgent meeting. Not with him, but with me. Jamie was asleep on the recliner next to the hospital bed when I left. The nurses promised to keep an eye on him. The advisor met me in a quiet office not far from the hospital. Nothing flashy. Just a desk, 2 chairs, and a locked filing cabinet. He looked uncomfortable, like he knew this meeting was going to cause some waves. He slid a folder across the table. Thick one. Inside were documents. Copies of accounts, property deeds, trust funds. Even an updated will my dad had drafted 3 months ago, apparently without telling anyone. Claire's name was everywhere. A joint account. A deed to the house she lived in. The one she always bragged about getting as a gift. A $50,000 education trust for each of her kids. Stock portfolios. Insurance beneficiaries. My name was on exactly 2 lines. A mention as next of kin and an old emergency contact form from years ago. He didn't say it, but I knew what he was thinking. Claire had been planning. Positioning. Maybe even pressuring. The timing lined up. She'd started calling lawyers within 24 hours of the accident. I asked if anything could be changed. He said technically yes. But only if your father's mental state is fully evaluated and confirmed. That happened the next day. My dad passed every cognitive test the doctors gave him. Slower than usual but sharp. Focused. Clear. When the advisor returned with a notary, my dad asked to revise everything. And I mean everything. He removed Claire as a joint account holder, transferred the house back into his name, dissolved the trust, revoked the power of attorney she'd been trying to activate. And when the advisor asked who he wanted to assign instead, he looked at me. I told him I didn't want anything. He shook his head and said, "This isn't about you. It's about him." Then he pointed at Jamie, who had just walked into the room holding 2 bags of chips from the vending machine. The new documents gave me full medical and financial power of attorney. A modest trust fund was created in Jamie's name. The rest, accounts, properties, savings, would stay with my dad for the rest of his life with a clause. If anything happened to him, Claire would receive nothing. It didn't feel like revenge. Not in the traditional way. Felt like a correction. A rebalancing. That weekend, my dad was discharged from the hospital. He asked to stay with us. I told him he could, but it would be on our terms. Quiet. No speeches. No fake apologies. He agreed. The day he moved in, Claire showed up at his old house with her 2 kids and a trunk full of groceries. She still had her key. The locks had already been changed. She stood on the porch for almost 20 minutes trying to call him. He didn't answer. Neither did I. When she finally left, she slammed the car door so hard it echoed across the block. She still hasn't spoken to him. He never called Jamie. For the first few weeks, things were quiet. My dad moved into our spare room with just a duffel bag and a stack of books. No drama, no demands. Just a man who looked like he was trying to figure out how to exist in a space where nothing was built for him, emotionally or physically. He spent most of his time sitting at the kitchen table watching Jamie draw or asking about things he had never bothered to ask before. His questions weren't always graceful. Sometimes he stumbled over simple things like what Jamie's favorite subject was or what shows he liked to watch. But the effort was there and it wasn't fake. One night after Jamie had gone to bed, he sat across from me in the living room and asked, "Why didn't you give up on me a long time ago?" I didn't answer right away. Mostly because I didn't have one. But I think it had something to do with Jamie. I didn't want him to learn hate the way I had learned silence. I didn't want him to carry around the idea that some people don't change. Because sometimes, rarely, they do. And maybe it doesn't erase anything, but it gives the next chapter a chance to be written differently. My dad started writing letters. Not to me. To Jamie. Little notes, one every few days, folded neatly and left under his door. Jamie didn't say much about them at first, but I saw him taping them up inside his closet door like they were treasures. He didn't call him Grandpa right away. But one day I heard him say it, casually, like it had always been there. As for Claire, she tried to fight back. She had her lawyer send letters. Claimed coercion, manipulation, even elder abuse. But the medical reports were clean. The legal process had been solid. No one forced him to change anything. She had just assumed he'd never wake up. One day she showed up at my apartment. She didn't knock. Just stood in the hallway waiting for someone to open the door. I didn't. Neither did Jamie. She waited 20 minutes and left. That was the last time I saw her. A few months later, my dad asked to do something unexpected. He wanted to host a dinner. Nothing big. Just me, Jamie, and a couple of people from the hospital who had helped him. I said okay. When the night came, we ate simple food on mismatched plates. Jamie talked about a comic book he was drawing. My dad listened like it was a lecture from NASA. At the end of the night, he raised a glass of apple cider and said, "To my real legacy. Not in bloodlines or property, but in patience, kindness, and second chances." I didn't cry. But Jamie smiled. And that was more than enough. The house Claire thought she'd inherit now belongs to a community scholarship program my dad set up in Jamie's name, for kids with quiet voices and big minds. Claire never saw it coming. He thought legacy was about money. But sometimes, the real legacy is the person no one expected to carry it. And that legacy, it lives here now. In this house. In this story. In Jamie.